Welcome back, everyone, and welcome to my new followers. I am over the moon that you have joined me and all the people that have stuck with me. Thank you so much. I know I'm an acquired taste, so I really appreciate that you're picking up what I'm putting down and you're coming on this journey with me. I can't wait to delve into today's episode where we're going to be talking about old-time radio again, but this time it's the holiday edition. I did an episode earlier in the year where I may have mentioned that old-time radio is my most favorite thing ever. I grew up on these literally from knee-high to a grasshopper. And they really helped to set fire to my imagination. It's probably why they call it the theater of the mind. Yeah. Call it that. I'm going to be giving you a little bit of backstory on these, and I'm also going to provide some holiday themed episodes for you to listen to. If you're not familiar with old time radio, may I suggest that you check out my episode on the great detectives of the Golden Age. I will put a link for it in the description for you. I'm also going to suggest that you mute it and turn on closed captioning because the music is so loud. It wasn't when I cut the episode, but when I uploaded it to YouTube, it's intense, and I do not know what happened. Moving on, the first radio show that I'm going to talk about is called Lights Out. Lights Out is a radio program that was primarily devoted to horror, mystery, and the supernatural. The show was created by Willis Cooper and then taken over by Arch Obler. Their whole thing was they wanted to create a midnight mystery serial to get listeners at the witching hour, midnight. They wanted to offer listeners an alternative to what was currently being played, which was basically just music. They eventually ended up scrapping the serial idea in favor of an anthology format that focused on crime thrillers and the supernatural. The first series of shows were actually only 15 minutes long and ran on a local NBC station, WENR, at midnight on Wednesdays. And that started in January of 1934. By April, the series was so popular that they actually expanded it to a half an hour. Interestingly, the show was actually discontinued in 1935, but it was brought back by popular demand a few weeks later. The series was picked up by NBC in April of 1935 and broadcast nationally, usually late at night and always on Wednesdays. Lights Out aired on different networks at various times from January 3rd, 1934 to the summer of 1947, and the series even eventually made the transition to television. Fancy. The show I'm going to provide for you today is actually holiday themed, if you can believe it, based on the description I just gave you. It's called Uninhabited, and it came out in 1937. The next show I'm going to tell you about is called The Shadow. The Shadow first appeared on radio in 1930 as the narrator of CBS's Detective Story Hour. By 1932, the character was the star of his own show and soon became the hero rather than the narrator. The show basically chronicled the adventures of a fella called Lamont Cranston and his companion, Margot Lane. As the Shadow, Cranston used a hypnotic power to cloud men's minds so that he was invisible to them. Yeah. This power was routinely used to battle crime bosses and various psychopaths, mad scientists, and even a werewolf. They all learned from the Shadow that the weed of crime bears bitter fruit and does not pay. Frank Reddick played the role of the Shadow until the show left the air in 1935. When the Shadow returned in 1937, the title role was played by a 22-year-old Orson Welles and, my favorite, Miss Aggie Moorehead as Margot Lane. The Shadow was later played by Bill Johnston, and Brett Morrison, who assumed the role from 1945 until the show's last broadcast in 1954. The holiday episode I'm going to provide for you today is called The Man Who Murdered Time, and that one came out in 1939. The next show I'm going to tell you about is called Lux Radio Theater. This show was an hour-long anthology series that began in 1934 and was performed before a live studio audience. They initially adapted Broadway plays during their first 2 seasons before they transitioned to adapting films. The series became the most popular dramatic anthology series on radio, and it was broadcast for more than 20 years and even continued on television as the Lux Video Theater through most of the 1950s. The host was the show's fictional producer, Douglas Garrick, who was portrayed by John Anthony, but eventually studio executive, film producer, and director Cecil B. DeMille took over as the host on June 1st, 1936, and he continued as the host until January 22nd, 1945. The really cool thing about this show was that they actually tried to get as many of the original stars of these movies and plays as they could. So it was almost like you were like really watching the movie. I mean, I guess not watching it, but listening to it. Theater of the mind. Use your imagination. The first Lux film adaptation was The Legionnaire and the Lady with Marlene Dietrich and Clark Gable, and that one was based on the film Morocco. And that was followed by a Lux adaptation of The Thin Man, one of my favorite movies, featuring the movie's actual stars, Myrna Loy and William Powell. The holiday episode I've got for you today is called Remember the Night, and that one came out in 1940, and it stars another of my favorites, Miss Barbara Stanwyck and Fred McMurray. The next radio show I've got on this list is a favorite comedy duo of mine, and it's called The Burns and Allen Show, and it stars George Burns and his wife, Gracie Allen. George and Gracie actually started out in vaudeville, then they made some pictures, began to appear on radio, and in 1932 they actually became regulars on the Guy Lombardo Show on CBS. When Lombardo switched to NBC, Burns and Allen took over his CBS spot with The Adventures of Gracie, and that started on September 19th, 1934. Their whole shtick was that George played the straight man flirt to his ditzy comedy flirtee, Gracie, who somehow always ended up outsmarting George, and who was actually the more popular of the two. Although they were married, their marriage wasn't actually written into the show until 1941, when George noticed that their flirtation act was getting a little stale and ratings were dropping. He revised the studio format to include husband and wife characters in a situation comedy setting, and that's when the show really took off, and their marriage pattern comedy format became what they were most well known for. The holiday episode I've chosen for you today is called Santa and the Wicked Witch, and that one came out in 1941. This last show I'm going to tell you about has a very special place in my heart, in that I was 9 years old when I first heard it, and it took until I was 25 to figure out what it was called so I could listen to it again. It was such an experience, it's almost hard to describe. Just to give you a little bit of backstory, the episode I'm going to share with you is called The Plot to Overthrow Christmas. This play was produced 3 times. It was so popular. It came out in 1938, 1940, and 1944. And the one we're listening to today is the 1942 version. So the backstory on this one is Norman Corwin was a fella that was hired by the CBS radio network and given his own show. It was called Norman Corwin's Words Without Music. After the show had been on for a while and, Christmas came up, Corwin was surprised by his producer, who put him on the spot, by asking him if he was going to do a Christmas show. He had no idea what to do, but he did have a line in his mind. It started as, "Have you heard of the plot to overthrow Christmas?" It's basically a dramatized poem about Nero trying to overthrow Christmas. I am not the biggest fan of poems. Poetry is not something I read very often. But this is absolutely wonderful, and I can't wait to share it with you.
The Plot to Overthrow Christmas by Norman Corwin. Did you hear about the plot to overthrow Christmas? Well, gather ye now from Maine to the Isthmus of Panama, and listen to the story of the utter inglory of some gory goings-on in hell. Now, it happened in Hades, ladies and gentlemen. It happened down there that the fiends held a meeting. The fiends held a meeting for the purpose of defeating Christmas. With the aid of a fade on the radio, we'll take you there with a hi and a hey-de-ho to hear firsthand the brewing of the plot down in the deepest Stygian grot.
Grot is a poetical term for grotto. Whenever you hear my voce sotto, or sotto voce, whichever you prefer, it's just I taking pains to make quite sure that nobody makes a poetical allusion which might in any way create confusion. I return you now to the voice you were hearing before I had to do this interfering.
As I was saying, in this Stygian grot, the notables of Limbo hatched a plot. And what went on in the sulphurous hole we'll soon pick up by remote control. Of course, such a pickup is not made quickly. As a matter of fact, it's done rather trickly. You mustn't mind if it sounds erratic. That's merely intraterrestrial static. And don't be surprised if you're deafened by thunder just as we start on our journey under. You'll hear earthquakes and all of the commoner varieties of natural phenomena. And so, below, via radio, to the regions where legions of the damned go.
And that's it, my dears. I do hope you check out some of these, and if you like them, perhaps try a few more non-holiday themed episodes. As always, if you liked what you saw, please like and subscribe. I have some more old Hollywood and Black history goodies for you in the new year, and I do hope you'll join me.